I walked into that mansion thinking I'd just be cleaning floors, but when I saw the billionaire's fiancée slap a pregnant maid across the face, something inside me snapped. Everyone else looked away. I didn't. That single moment of courage changed everything and nearly cost me my life. Before I tell you what happened next, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Iris, and 6 months ago, I was completely broke. I'm talking about the kind of broke where you're counting coins to buy instant noodles and praying your landlord forgets rent is due. I'm 25 years old and I had dreams once, big dreams. I wanted to be a teacher, maybe work with kids who came from backgrounds like mine. But life doesn't care much about your dreams when the cafe you've been working at for 3 years suddenly shuts down overnight. I remember sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at my laptop screen with my bank account showing $17.32. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through job listings. That's when I saw it, an ad from an exclusive staffing agency looking for household staff for wealthy families. The pay was listed as highly competitive, which usually means they don't want to scare you off with the actual number. I applied that same night, not really expecting anything to come of it. 2 days later, my phone rang. The woman on the other end had this crisp, professional voice that made me sit up straighter, even though she couldn't see me. She said they had a position available at the Wellington estate, and would I be available for an interview the following morning? I said yes before she even finished the sentence. The Wellington estate. I'd heard that name before. Everyone in the city had. Adrian Wellington was one of those billionaires you see in business magazines. 32 years old, inherited his father's real estate empire, and somehow made it even bigger. The kind of man who owned half the skyline. The next morning, I put on the only professional outfit I owned, a simple grey dress and flats that had seen better days. The estate was an hour outside the city, and as the bus got closer, the houses got bigger and the streets got quieter. When I finally reached the address, I actually gasped out loud. The mansion wasn't just big, it was the kind of place you see in movies, with tall iron gates, a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, and a fountain in front that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned combined. A security guard let me through, and I walked up to the massive front door with my heart pounding in my chest. The door opened before I could even knock, and a man in his 60s with silver hair and a perfectly pressed suit looked me up and down. This was Gerald, the head butler, though I didn't know that yet. He led me through the entrance hall, and I tried not to stare at the crystal chandelier hanging above us or the marble staircase that curved up to the second floor. Everything gleamed. Everything was perfect. He brought me to a small office and gestured for me to sit. The interview was strange. Gerald didn't ask me much about my experience or qualifications. Instead, he talked about rules. Never speak unless spoken to. Never make eye contact with Mr. Wellington or his fiancée unless they address you directly. Stay invisible. Do your work quietly and efficiently. He kept emphasizing that last part, staying invisible. Then he told me the salary, and I nearly fell out of my chair. It was 3 times what I'd made at the cafe, 3 times, for cleaning and basic household work. I should have known right then that something was off. Nobody pays that much unless there's a catch. Gerald leaned forward and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Miss Helena can be particular. If you want to keep this position, you'll learn to anticipate her needs and stay out of her way." The way he said her name, Miss Helena, it was careful, almost fearful. I needed the money too badly to ask questions. I told him I could start immediately. My first day, I arrived at 6 in the morning. A woman named Clara showed me around. She was in her 50s with kind eyes and grey hair pulled back in a bun. As we walked through the endless hallways, she pointed out which rooms needed daily cleaning, where the supplies were kept, and which areas were off-limits. The mansion had 30 bedrooms. 30. Most of them were never even used. I met a few other staff members: Ben, the gardener, who barely looked up from his work, and Sophie, another maid who couldn't have been more than 20. Sophie had these wide, nervous eyes, like a rabbit that expected a fox to jump out at any moment. During lunch break in the staff kitchen, Clara pulled me aside. "Listen to me carefully," she said quietly, even though we were alone. "Keep your head down around Miss Helena. Don't look at her too long. Don't speak unless she asks you a direct question. And if she gets angry, just apologize and leave the room as quickly as possible." I asked her why, and she just shook her head. "Helena Blackwood has gotten 3 maids fired in the last month alone. One of them was let go because she sneezed too loudly while cleaning Miss Helena's sitting room." That afternoon, I saw Adrian Wellington for the first time. He was walking through the main hallway in an expensive suit, phone pressed to his ear, talking about stock prices and acquisitions. He was handsome in that cold, polished way, sharp jawline, dark hair perfectly styled, not a single emotion on his face. He walked past me like I was part of the furniture, which, I suppose, I was. Then I saw her, Helena Blackwood. She descended the main staircase like she was walking a runway, wearing a white dress that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. Her blonde hair was swept up elegantly, and diamonds sparkled at her throat and wrists. She was breathtaking, but when I accidentally made eye contact with her, her expression changed. Her blue eyes went ice cold, and her perfect lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. She looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on expensive carpet. Then she turned away and called for Gerald, complaining that there were too many unfamiliar faces in her home. I learned quickly that beauty could be deceiving. On my 3rd day, I was polishing silverware in the formal dining room when I heard screaming. Not the kind of scream that comes from fear. This was rage, pure, unfiltered rage. I followed the sound and found Helena standing over a young maid named Catherine, who was on her hands and knees picking up pieces of a broken crystal vase. Helena was screaming about a wrinkle, a tiny, barely visible wrinkle in the tablecloth Catherine had laid out for a dinner party that evening. The words coming out of Helena's perfect mouth were vicious. She called Catherine stupid, worthless, incompetent. Then she grabbed another vase from the shelf and threw it against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. "Clean it up," Helena hissed, then stood there watching with this small, satisfied smile as Catherine scrambled to pick up the glass with shaking hands. I stood frozen in the doorway. Where was Adrian? Where was Gerald? Why wasn't anyone stopping this? But as I looked around, I saw other staff members carefully walking past, eyes down, pretending they heard nothing. That evening, Sophie explained it to me. Helena came from old money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for generations. Adrian's family was new money in comparison. There was a massive business merger happening between the Wellington and Blackwood companies, and this marriage was the final seal on the deal. It wasn't about love. It was about power and money and connections. "He doesn't love her," Sophie whispered, "and I don't think she loves him either. But neither of them will walk away because too much is at stake." I asked her why Adrian let Helena treat everyone so terribly, and Sophie just shrugged. "He's never here when it happens, or if he is, he just walks away. I think he's too focused on his business empire to care how his fiancée treats the help." 2 weeks into the job, I thought I'd learned how to navigate the mansion, keep my head down, do my work, collect my paycheck. I'd almost convinced myself I could tolerate it. The money was changing my life. I'd paid my rent, bought actual groceries, even started a small savings account. Then came the day that changed everything. I was cleaning the 2nd floor hallway, running a cloth along the baseboards, when I heard shouting coming from Adrian's study. The door was slightly open, and I could see inside. Helena was standing in the center of the room, her face twisted with fury. In front of her stood Anna, a sweet woman in her late 30s who'd been with the Wellington family for 5 years. Anna was 6 months pregnant, her belly round and visible beneath her uniform. Helena was holding her designer handbag, and there was a dark stain spreading across the cream-coloured leather. Anna was apologising over and over, explaining that she'd accidentally bumped the tea cart and the pot had tipped. "You clumsy, worthless piece of trash," Helena snarled. "This bag costs more than you make in a year. How dare you? How dare you be so stupid?" Anna's eyes were filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Miss Helena. I'll pay for it. I'll work extra." "You think your pathetic salary could cover this? You're nothing. You're just a stupid cow who can't even carry a tray without making a mess." Then it happened. Helena raised her hand and slapped Anna hard across the face. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. Anna stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, the other instinctively wrapping around her pregnant belly. Everything inside me went still. I saw Anna's terrified face. I saw Helena's hand raising again. I saw every maid, every staff member who'd learned to look away, to stay silent, to protect themselves. And I thought of my mother who'd worked as a cleaner her whole life, who'd come home with stories about employers who treated her like she was invisible, who told me that dignity wasn't about the job you had, but how you carried yourself through the world. "Stop!" The word came out of my mouth before I could think. I stepped into the room, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Helena spun around, and her eyes widened in genuine shock. I don't think anyone had ever interrupted her before. "Stop," I said again, my voice stronger this time. "She's pregnant. You could hurt the baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Anna stared at me with horror and gratitude mixed together. Helena's face went through several emotions: shock, confusion, and then pure rage. "Who do you think you are?" Helena's voice was deadly quiet now, which was somehow worse than the screaming. "How dare you speak to me? How dare you interfere?" My legs were shaking, but I moved toward Anna and gently helped her to her feet. "Are you okay?" I asked her softly. Anna nodded, tears streaming down her face. Helena's voice rose to a shriek. "You're fired! Do you hear me? Pack your things and get out of my house right now." "It's not your house." The new voice came from the doorway, and we all turned. Adrian Wellington stood there in his suit, his expression unreadable. How long had he been standing there? How much had he seen? Helena's anger flickered with something else. Uncertainty. "Adrian, darling, this maid was being insubordinate. I was simply—" "I know what you were doing." Adrian's voice was cold and controlled. He looked at Anna. "Are you hurt?" Anna shook her head quickly, probably too afraid to speak. Adrian turned his gaze to me, and I met his eyes for the first time. "What's your name?" "Iris," I managed to say. "Iris isn't fired," he said, still looking at me. "Neither is Anna. Anna has been with this family for 5 years and has never given us any reason to let her go." He finally turned to Helena. "One damaged bag is not worth someone's job." Then he said something I'll never forget. He looked directly at me and said, "Someone needs to have a spine in this house." Helena's face went white, then red. She opened her mouth to argue, but Adrian had already turned and walked away. After a moment of furious silence, Helena grabbed her stained bag and stormed out, her heels clicking violently against the marble floor. I helped Anna to the staff room and got her some water. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "You should have just looked away like everyone else." I didn't have a good answer except the truth. Because it was wrong. Word spread through the mansion like wildfire. The new maid had stood up to Helena. Some of the staff thanked me quietly when no one else was around. Others started avoiding me, afraid that associating with me would make them targets of Helena's revenge. Clara pulled me aside that evening. "What you did was brave," she said. "But Helena never forgets, and she never forgives. Watch your back." She was right. The revenge started small. My cleaning supplies would go missing. My schedule would mysteriously change, putting me in charge of the worst jobs. I'd find my carefully organized supply closet in complete chaos. Once I discovered that someone had poured bleach all over a load of delicate linens I'd just washed, ruining them, and a note in my locker blamed me for the damage. But something else strange was happening too. Adrian started appearing more often when I was working. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then I'd be cleaning the library and he'd walk in. I'd be polishing the banister and he'd stop to take a phone call nearby. It felt deliberate. One afternoon, I was cleaning windows in the conservatory when he walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Why did you do it? You knew Helena would have you fired." I turned to face him, still holding my cloth. "Because someone had to. That woman is carrying a baby. What Helena did was cruel." He studied me with those dark eyes. "Most people in your position would have looked away." "I'm not most people." He almost smiled. Almost. "No, I'm starting to see that." Then he asked me about myself, where I was from, what I'd done before this job, what I wanted to do with my life. It was surreal, standing there in my maid's uniform, having a conversation with a billionaire, like I was a real person, and not just part of the furniture. I told him about wanting to be a teacher, about the cafe closing down, about needing this job to survive. He listened in a way that felt genuine, and for just a moment, I saw something human behind that cold exterior. But then I reminded myself, he was engaged, and I was just the maid who'd caused trouble. This wasn't some fairy tale. Still, something had shifted. I felt it, and I think he did too. Helena noticed. Of course she noticed, and that's when things got truly dangerous. 3 weeks after the incident with Anna, Helena called a house meeting. All the staff were summoned to the grand hall, which never happened unless something serious was going on. We all stood there nervously while Helena stood on the main staircase like a queen, addressing her subjects. "There's a thief in this house," she announced. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed directly on me. "My diamond bracelet is missing. It's worth $50,000, and it was in my jewelry box this morning." My stomach dropped. "I want every room searched," Helena continued, "starting with the staff quarters." Gerald looked uncomfortable but nodded. We were all sent to our rooms while a search was conducted. 20 minutes later, Gerald appeared at my door, his face grave. "We found it," he said quietly, "in your dresser drawer." "What? No, that's impossible. I didn't—" But Helena was already there, pushing past Gerald, holding up a glittering diamond bracelet triumphantly. "Call the police," she demanded. "I want her arrested for theft." I felt like the room was spinning. This couldn't be happening. I'd never stolen anything in my life. "I didn't take it," I said, my voice breaking. "Someone put it there. I've never even been in her room." "Of course you'd say that," Helena sneered. "Adrian, call the police, now." But Adrian was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, watching the scene with a calculating expression. "Everyone in the main hall," he said, "now." We all filed back into the grand hall. The tension was suffocating. Helena stood beside Adrian, looking victorious. I stood with the other staff, trying not to cry, knowing my life was about to fall apart over something I didn't do. Then Sophie stepped forward. She was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering, but she moved into the center of the room. "I saw Miss Helena go into Iris's room this morning," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was carrying something. I saw her through the door." The hall went dead silent. Helena's face went pale. "That's a lie. She's covering for her friend." But Sophie's confession had broken the dam. Another maid stepped forward. "Miss Helena has been cruel to us for months. She threw hot coffee on my arm last month and told me I'd be fired if I reported it." Ben, the gardener, spoke up. "She destroyed my tools and blamed it on my carelessness." One by one, staff members started sharing their stories. Years of abuse, humiliation, and fear came pouring out. Gerald finally stepped forward, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "I've been documenting incidents," he admitted. "I have written records going back 8 months. I was afraid someone would get seriously hurt, and I wanted evidence in case. He trailed off. Adrian's jaw tightened as he listened. He turned to Helena, and his voice was colder than ice. The engagement is off. Helena's triumphant expression crumbled. You can't be serious. Adrian, these are just servants. They're lying because she convinced them to get out. My family will destroy you. The merger will fall apart. You'll lose everything. Adrian stepped closer to her. Then I'll lose everything. I won't marry someone who treats people like this. I won't build an empire on this kind of cruelty. Helena's mask finally dropped completely. She screamed, threw her bracelet at the wall, called him every name she could think of. She knocked over a vase, shoved furniture, showed everyone exactly who she really was beneath that beautiful exterior. Security escorted her out while she was still screaming threats. The moment the door closed behind her, the entire mansion seemed to exhale. Several staff members were crying. Anna came over and hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being brave when the rest of us couldn't." 3 months passed. The mansion transformed. There was laughter in the hallways now. Adrian cancelled the merger. It cost him, but he found other business partners. More importantly, he changed. He learned everyone's names. He asked about our lives, our families. He became present in his own home. One evening, he found me in the library. I was dusting shelves, humming quietly to myself. "Iris," he said, and I turned around. "I have a question for you." "Yes, sir?" "Would you have dinner with me, not as your employer, just as 2 people?" I stared at him. "I'm still the maid, Adrian." "You were never just the maid, not from the moment you stood up to Helena." He smiled, really smiled, for the first time since I'd met him. "You showed me that courage isn't about power or money. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. You changed this house. You changed me." I thought about it, thought about everything that had happened, about the risk of saying yes to someone so far above my station. But then I thought about what my mother always told me, that dignity and worth aren't about the job you have or how much money you make. "Okay," I said. "Yes." Last week, Anna had her baby, a healthy little girl with the loudest cry I've ever heard. The staff threw a celebration in the garden, and Adrian came. He held that tiny baby with such gentleness, smiling genuinely, and I watched the man he was becoming. Standing up to Helena that day was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, and every instinct told me to stay quiet and safe. But staying silent would have been worse. Sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when your voice trembles and your knees shake. That single moment of choosing to speak up instead of looking away, it changed everything. It changed the mansion, it changed Adrian, and it changed me. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had to stand up to someone powerful? I read every single comment. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.